Good evening, everyone. My name is Meetup. I'm the chair of the Budget Committee. I'd like to now call to order the meeting, today, the Sherwood Budget Committee meeting. Today is May 9th. The time is now approximately 6:08. Katie, could you kindly take roll call?
Chair Meyer.
Here.
Vice Chair Mayer.
Here.
Susan Claus.
Here.
Matt Kaufman.
Here.
Tyrone Stammers.
Here.
Katie Strode.
Here.
Nancy Taylor.
Here.
Renee Browse.
Here.
Councillor Garland.
Here.
Councillor Griffin.
Here.
Mayor Mays we will be contacting him by phone in a few minutes. Councillor Scott.
Here.
Councillor Rosner.
Here.
Councillor Young.
Here. All right. Tonight's meeting will be a working and listening session with department director presentations. We will have time for general public comment at the beginning of this meeting. If you wish to speak, please fill out a public comment form and give it to Colleen up at the dais. To speak. The committee, I will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through me, please. Toward the end of tonight's meeting, we will have a public hearing on state shared revenue with time for public comment on the use of shared revenues. Do we have a motion to approve the Budget Committee meeting minutes for April 11th?
I'll move we approve the minutes.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. And now we will move on to the election of a new committee chair.
So per ORS 294.4149, the Budget Committee is required to elect the presiding officer at the first meeting when they receive the budget message. I would like to request Chair Meyer to open the floor for nominations of the chair position for the fiscal year 2019-20 budget cycle. Committee members, please refrain from voting on the nominations until all nominations have been made and accepted or declined.
I do open the floor for nominations.
I'd like to nominate Meetup Meyer to continue as chair.
Me too.
Me three.
I believe you second.
I'd like to nominate Nancy Taylor.
All right. Katie, I'm not sure how to call for a vote or discussion.
So we would open the floor for votes for the first candidate, and we would open the floor for votes for the second candidate. Each person can only vote for one since we have two candidates. Are there any other nominations, or do we just have the two? Just the two?
So all in favor of Meetup Meyer to continue as chair of the Budget Committee, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Should we do a show of hands actually for Colleen? It sounds like.
That would be better, yes.
And
Okay.
opposed is not,
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah, I
opposed
guess.
to you.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Susan. Okay, how about with the show of hands? All that would like for me to continue as the Budget Committee chair. Okay, fine.
Are all? 1, 2. We have 10.
And all in favor of Nancy as committee chair?
So Nancy, are you?
No, I'm not voting. I'm abstaining.
You're abstaining? So 2 and 1 abstain.
Okay, so I will continue on as committee chair. And now we will open the floor for nominations for vice chair.
I'll nominate Nancy Taylor.
I'll nominate Paul Mayer. Okay.
Anyone else? All right, with a show of hands, if you'd like to vote for Nancy Taylor as vice chair, please raise your hand. Nancy, you win. now open the meeting to accept public comment on the 2019-20 City of Sherwood proposed budgets. Colleen, has anyone?
Where will they be commenting from?
Is the podium set up for comment? Great.
Also, you get another one.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So all those who have completed the testimony forms and have submitted to Colleen, we did just receive one additional form, and I can give that to you after. When your name is called, please come to speak at the microphone. Please state your name and city of residence for the record, as this hearing will be recorded. Please do speak clearly into the microphone. And again, please do direct your comments to me. Please limit your testimony to 4 minutes. Travis Hampton.
Is this close enough, Madam Chair?
Perfect.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee, members of the council. My name is Travis Hampton. I'm from Salem, Oregon. I'm the Superintendent of Oregon State Police. I'm here tonight to support the City of Sherwood Police Department budget. I'd just like to briefly commend you and your police department, and specifically the leadership of the police department. I've known your chief for the better part of 30 years. I've worked with him as a line officer, middle manager, and now as a police executive. Sherwood has the highest of reputations within the state and out of state for an efficient police department, a progressive police department, one that manages the resources very well. It's not an accident that your chief is the outgoing president of the Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police, voted among his peers to lead the organization. Washington County has a very special, unique law enforcement situation. It's very well run at the county level with our elected official, the DA, the sheriff, and our city police departments, because you do have that level of autonomy that much of the state does not have. Only about a third to roughly half the state even supplies 24-hour police coverage around Oregon. Much of 101, Highway 97 corridor, most of Central Oregon, all of Southern, all of Eastern Oregon does not have enough police officers to even police their towns or their highways or interstate freeway systems. Oregon State Police ranks second from the bottom on troopers per 100,000 residents in the state. We do not supply 24-hour coverage anywhere in the state. We have roughly half the resources we had 40 years ago. We put out a police department now that's commensurate with about the late 1960s for staffing. Why is that important to you? Because we don't police your highways that run through your metropolitan areas any longer. Highway 99 that runs through town is now the obligation, unfortunately, that falls to you all to police that highway, plus your influx of residents that live and travel through the area. So by having that autonomy, by supporting the FTE and the police department budget, it allows you to appropriately staff and police your city. Oregon, regrettably ranks last nationally on police officers per 100,000. We have 5,500 police officers to police 4.2 million citizens, and Washington County is just one of those unique places that you have standalone police department, sheriff's office to police your residents and your visitors to your state, because I unfortunately am not here to help when you need me. You should be able to count on that, but we're just not staffed to do that. So I would support the police department's budget. It's well run. It's recognized as an efficient organization. And if this was my town where I lived, I would certainly like to have a police department that could be responsive to the citizens and the visitors to the city. So thank you for allowing me to take your time in front of your budget committee. I just wanted to come here personally to voice my support for the budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hampton. Kevin Barton, please.
Good evening, Madam Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, and members of the committee and the council. My name is Kevin Barton, and I am the district attorney for Washington County. And to echo Superintendent Hampton's comments, this is my town where I live, and I'm very happy to call it my home. I'm very happy to be the district attorney for all of Washington County. And we have a unique county, as Superintendent Hampton was referencing. Our county is really unique because of the hallmark of collaboration among law enforcement professionals in our county, but also we're unique because we have so many qualified police departments. And the Sherwood Police Department, I'm really happy to say, as both a resident and as the district attorney is second to none here in Washington County. So I'm here to testify to thank you for the continued support that the City Council and I know this members in this committee have offered for the Sherwood Police Department, and to urge that you continue that as you move forward in the future. I can tell you from my county perspective as the district attorney, looking at the entirety of the county, we are a busy and growing county. Just last year, for example, my office received over 11,000 cases that came to us for review. And we filed a little over 8,000 of those criminal cases, a significant number coming from cities just like Sherwood. And all of the issues that you see in the news and you hear about online, things like the opioid addiction, drug addiction issues, mental health crises, homelessness, property crime rise, all of those things we're dealing with here in Washington County, and we're well equipped to deal with those challenges in large part because of the work from police departments like the Sherwood Police Department and from the collaboration that Chief Growth and the members in that department have been able to offer across the county. Just today, for example, Chief Growth and I were in a meeting with other chiefs of police for Washington County talking about many of the different challenges we're facing, and one of them, for example, is how to handle the proliferation of digital devices that often play a role in our criminal investigations. And it's that ability to be able to work with departments like Sherwood that are keeping pace with the growth that is happening within not just the Sherwood city limits, but the county-wide. Knowing that the council and your committee have a commitment to fully funding the police department allows people in my position in the district attorney's office to be able to keep our citizens safe. And as a resident of this city, that's very important to me on a very personal level. So thank you very much for that, and I truly appreciate the support that you're offering for the Sherwood Police Department. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barton. And we have one more person, and I apologize. The last name? Oh, thank you. Steve Munsterman.
Forever. Steve Munsterman, 23371 Southwest Shirk. Been a Sherwood resident long enough, off and on, to remember when there were 2 police officers in this city. So that's a shortage. I wanted to offer my support and request that you support the budget in regard to police staffing, and my simple review and conversation with the chief led me to find a bunch of simple things, at least in my mind, that made it make sense. We've discussed this repeatedly since 2010-11, when was the last time an officer was added to the department. So that's a long time ago. That was when photo radar was added. So we added somebody, but used up all their time working on that. Response times are increasing. Citizen calls for service are increasing. Officer-initiated actions are decreasing. First line supervisors, i.e. the sergeant, is only scheduled 50% of the time. It's probably not a real good thing regarding liability and making sure the place runs right. They're only scheduled 50% of the time, and the lone existing detective is overwhelmed with, or their existing detective is overloaded with the existing caseload. Also, I wanted to support the budget proposal that's providing for additional public works staffing for a couple of very simple reasons that I'll state. First, my knowledge of public works, having spent a career performing public works activities. A couple of simple things is, once something is built, and you can pick anything you want that belongs to the city, the street you drove on to get here, the water you used to drink, or the water you wanted to go away from your house after you didn't want it anymore, all those things. Once something is built, Public Works maintains it forever, and that's a long time. And forever, and until the item is replaced, and then it starts again. So there's no end to all the maintenance activities that have to go on. And regular ongoing maintenance is proven always less costly than extensive repairs and or disruptive system failures, which, none of us want to wake up in the morning with no water for 12 hours or something, or things like that. That does happen in other communities on a regular basis. Furthermore, I wanted to offer praise to everyone involved for ensuring that the general fund ending balance is at the top of the target level again. That 10 to 20 or 10's lovely, 20's even better. And also that the maintenance activities that are laid out in the city's asset management plans are provided for in this proposal, which hasn't always happened due to funding. So with that, I will listen to the city manager and the staff tell us a bunch more before I comment again next meeting. So
Thank you very much, Mr. Musterman. Okay. I don't believe there were any other comments or testimonies.
Good evening. Let the record show the mayor has joined the meeting at 6:23. We have just finished the public comment portion, Mr. Mayor, and are starting in on new business on the agenda.
Thank you.
Joe, take it away.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. Most of you have been here before. We have a couple new first-time budget committee members, so I kind of want to go over. This tends to be more of a working meeting. You're going to hear from me, you're going to hear from Katie, you're going to hear from different department directors. We're going to go through the budget. We encourage questions from you. That's an important part of this whole process. So, and we'll see how far we get tonight. So, I always say this before diving in. I do not sit here and read my budget message. Hopefully you will have read it already. I am going to go over a PowerPoint presentation that provides kind of a 30,000-foot overview, which I'll mention in a second. I also want to stress that this is my proposed budget as the city manager. However, the work that goes into it started back in January, and here we are in May. And it is a team effort. Katie, as finance director, obviously does a tremendous amount of work with her staff and putting the document together and running a million scenarios and what ifs and making sure all the numbers match. So I want to publicly thank Katie and her staff for all the work that goes into this. I also want to thank my department directors who each year put their specific proposals together with their staffs. It is a team effort. It says city manager recommended budget, but it's the team behind it. And I always want to make sure people know that. Okay, so last week I did something different. I had what is called an employee meetup, which is something I do every couple months, essentially, which is an opportunity for staff to hear directly from me in this room. I usually give them highlights about what's going on in City Hall and take questions from them. So last week I took the opportunity before this document was released to go through this PowerPoint that you also received. So staff knew before my budget was released what was in there and some of the key points. So I thought instead of creating a different one, I'm just going to use the same PowerPoint and hit some of the highlights, and then we'll get into the details later. So with that, hopefully this will work.
For those of you who have the packet, this is on page 20 of your packet. If you, no, it's not connected to this. We're gonna.
So it's truly just a pointer. Okay.
Pointer.
Can you go to the... And he's going to make it work. Thank you, Brad. Hopefully.
And that's the first packet, not the second packet, sorry.
Excellent.
The agenda, yeah.
All right. So some of this information for the council may be repetitive, but since we have 7 citizen members of council and for the public, there's some things that I want to stress that's very important. This council has, in my opinion, in the 7 years I've been here almost, has really done a great job in terms of council goal setting the last year and a half. They really went back and revisited the city's mission statement, the core values, and have done a great job of giving direction to me and my team in terms of what is important to council. So this budget attempts to closely align as much as possible to some of these things that are up on the screen. The letters in red are things that jump out related to the budget that I want to just stress. So if you don't know what the city's revised mission statement is as an organization, it's up on the screen. Provide high quality services for all residents and businesses through strong relationships and innovation in a fiscally responsible manner. That was very intentional by the council to have that fiscally responsible manner as part of our overall mission statement. That's very important. And then our core values, some of those core values have been around for years. The 3 that tie directly back to this budget in terms of what we're trying to do, fiscal responsibility, obviously, transparent government. We're trying to be as transparent as possible. I think we attempt to do that each year in everything we do. And most importantly, forward thinking. I think the Budget Committee saw last year we're doing a much better job of doing 5-year financial forecasting. I think each year we're getting better and better. We have tools available. We're getting used to looking out over the horizon and not doing budgets just in a 1-year cycle and not thinking about the long term. That's important to Katie as the finance director. That's important to me, and it's very, very important to the city council. So I wanted to highlight those 3 or stress those 3 core values. This chart is in your budget message, but this is just generally comparing this current year to what is in my proposed budget. So if you look at all funds, you see a pretty healthy increase. All funds in the proposed budget are $39.4 million. That's an 18.2% increase, which is a pretty significant increase. It's about $6 million, but I want to point out most of that increase, if you look at this chart, $4 million of that, $4.6 million, is in the waterfront. So that is really, when you look at the overall budget for all funds, the majority of that increase is in the waterfront, and we'll get to that and why that is during this whole process. The general fund bumps up 6.7%, about $1 million, and the same comment I want to make, if you notice, police services stands out as a 13.4% increase over the current year's budget, which is largely because I am proposing 3 positions in the police department. And you can see most of those funds either go up or down slightly, and that varies year to year. It's not unusual. So, but overall, I'm projecting or proposing a pretty healthy increase in terms of next year's budget. These are 2 policies you have as a budget committee and ultimately city council. If you look in the back of the book, there's 6 to 8 pages of various financial policies. I want to remind the budget committee and the public there are 2 key policies that we always work with when we're putting the budget together. The first one is basically a policy that we live within our means. We have to balance the budget. Current operations have to be funded by current sustainable revenues. We're not like the federal government or even the state government. We have to live within our means. And I'm actually very proud that local government does that. The other key policy that we talk about every year is that one-time revenues can only be used for one-time expenditures or as contributions to our reserves and will not pay for ongoing expenses. So those 2 work hand in hand. And I wanted to highlight that in this overview. So in the general fund, which is the fund we're going to focus on tonight and the one we spend the most time and energy with, in the proposed budget, you see projected revenues of $13.6 million and proposed operating expenses at $13.67. So we've left $12,787 on the table, so to speak. So that's fairly normal that we try to squeeze as much ongoing operating expenses out of what we believe we're going to achieve in terms of operating revenues. And that has to balance. If that wasn't balanced, then I and my team are not doing my job. By state law, I have to propose a balanced budget. One-time expenses we're proposing, and there is a list in your materials of $1.4 million. And we can go over those if you have questions about any of those one-time expenses. We usually get questions about what those are. Our fund balance, if we get everything correctly, a year from now will be $1.4 million less than what it is now in terms of projections.
I'm sorry, Joe, could you repeat that?
So if we hit the target of revenues and expenses and spend what we are projecting to spend in this budget, a year from now, if we get it correct, our fund balance will be $1.4 million less than what it is projected to be at the end of this fiscal year, which is June 30th.
Were there changes to the budget since your slide was done?
Oh, I was just reading on page 5 where it said one-time expenditures, 1.524 million.
That's net expenditures? Right, he put in here one-time expenses, that's net one-time. So one-time revenues less one-time expenses are the 1.432.
One-time expenditures?
So do you know what number she's talking about?
Yes, so if you look on page 17 of your original packet, for those of you number people, the original packet that had the agenda on the front, and you look on page 17 that says General Fund One-Time Activity, at the very top there's a summary. The number that you're looking at, the 1,564,451, that's the number you're looking at, I'm assuming, in the narrative.
Looking at a different number, but maybe I'm reading something different. It says, I'm again recommending the use of portions of the general funding ending funding balance as well as one-time revenues to fund one-time expenditures 1.524.
So that one is a typo then. The 1.564 is the final.
Is accurate.
And the one-time revenues are 131, and the difference between the two is the 1,432,998.
Okay.
Good catch.
So the net on page 5 should be the one.
It should be 1,564,451.
Any other questions?
And
before I
that
move
difference is the cost of N4, just so you know. It was a last-minute catch to move N4 to the cloud, which we'll talk about when we get to CDD.
Okay, I want to touch on, and we'll get into details when we get into departments. This proposed budget, as I do every year, I get requests from departments for additional personnel. Some have been included in my proposed budget, some have not been included in my proposed budget. We are proposing to eliminate one position in admin, and that is a legal finance admin assistant 3 position, essentially using the proceeds from that cut to add one court clerk 1. And we'll get into the rationale behind that. If you know anything about the Speed on Green program, and you probably saw in your packet that was sent out yesterday, the volume of tickets that we're still processing. Court needs that additional resource. We are adding 3 positions in the police department. One would be an admin assistant 1 position. This is tied to the council goal of beginning to implement the police staffing plan. So that's a position, if you end up approving the budget and that ultimately being adopted by council, that would be July 1st. We would add an additional detective, also July 1st, in the police department. And then one additional police sergeant, spreading it out, we would add that position in January 2020. Chief Groth can explain why, if you're curious why the staggering of the additions. That was his recommendation. All three of those are tied to that council goal. We are also proposing to add, it's entitled an Economic Development Coordinator. It could end up being an Economic Development Manager position. I think we've had some input that maybe it should be a manager. We had an Economic Development Manager position up till right before I got here in 2012, and that was eliminated because of budget cuts. So we're proposing to bring that back. That's an important goal for the City Council. It is a limited duration position. If we had long-term sustainable revenues to support it, it wouldn't be limited duration. But I don't have identified sustainable revenues to support it more than 2 years. No, it'll be 2 years. It'll be in next year's budget. And we'll get into this. Our hope is that that position will be successful, that we'll be able to retain that position longer than 2 years. So again, we'll get into that. That is also tied to a council goal. Public Works has requested a halftime emergency management coordinator. We'll talk about that through this process over the coming evening and probably next week. The next few positions are largely funded out of the enterprise fund. That's important to note. 2 maintenance worker 2 position, 1 funded by the streets fund, 1 funded by the stormwater fund. 1 seasonal maintenance worker 1 funded out of the stormwater fund. So those are all the requested positions that are included in my proposed budget. This is a list of requests that I am not including in my proposed budget. Not necessarily because the work or the request wasn't justified from a workload. It's a financial decision. I had to have a balanced budget, and these don't make the list currently. So 1 is a HR tech position in admin to assist the HR manager in her day-to-day activities. We had a request to increase the records tech from half-time to either a 3/4 or a full-time position from the city recorder. I'll touch on that tonight. Community Development asked for an increase for an admin 2 position from 30 to 40 hours. That didn't make the budget. The kitchen coordinator position over at the senior center through Kristen's department requested 3 additional hours a week. That is not funded in my proposed budget. Same thing, the senior center manager requests from 35 to 40 hours a week did not get recommended in my budget. A number of library positions, increasing the tech services librarian, 32 to 40 hours didn't make it. Youth services from 20 to 26 hours did not make it. And adding an admin assistant to the library, either a half or full-time, did not make it. Public Works also had a request to add an additional maintenance worker in parks that did not make the proposed budget. And then 2 seasonal maintenance worker ones in parks. So when department directors come up, I've kind of prepped them, and I think I actually sent this out to the budget committee. They will talk about why they wanted the positions, why they felt the need to ask. And then most importantly, I think folks, okay, we're not funding it this year. What's the impact of not funding that position or increasing those hours? So they're prepared to answer those questions. Fund balance. We've talked about fund balance. These are a couple of key financial policies, and I think a few people actually mentioned this already. So in the general fund, we have a goal to have an unrestricted fund balance of at least 10%. And striving toward maintaining 20%. I think in the last few years, we really are striving to, the 20% is the magic number. Anytime we go below 20%, I think it causes a level of discomfort for folks around the table. But our real goal is at least 10%. And we actually learned in a meeting we had with the school board recently. The school board and the city council met recently, and we were talking about our respective budget challenges. And the school district has a goal of 10%, and they're only at 7%. They look at our fund balance and just are very, very jealous, they tell us. So their cash flow is very different and much more complicated, and I think I walked out of that room saying I'll stick with budgeting in the city budgets versus school district budgets. So you can.
Tim, would you please turn on your microphone? Thank you.
Just a question on fund balance. Obviously, we have to have that balance so we can pay people until we get property tax revenues in November. Just best guess, at what point do we have to start borrowing money from other funds or doing something to make it to November? Is that 5%, 2%, 10%?
Good question.
So it is. It's actually closer to between 15 and 17%. It's actually pretty high. We take it down really low because it's not just the property taxes. It's actually also the first quarter revenues that we get in from franchise fees and things like that. So it is property taxes, but we also have several quarterly revenues that don't come in until that first quarter. And quarterly revenues that are due in September don't actually come in until late October. So October is a dry month.
So thank you. That's perfect. I've always been curious about that. So thank you. So the way I hear that, 10% is kind of we can get by, but we're borrowing money.
At 10%, we are borrowing not for a full month. So there are legal but not recommended ways to do that, so that it's within the same month. My preference is to never drop the cash below zero in a fund. I prefer to make sure that at all times the cash is above zero in all funds, rather than having the pooled cash just be above. But that has happened even at just, once you get below that 17%, it gets.
So the 20% is really so we're not getting behind and having to borrow money.
That's correct.
Okay.
If we don't charge ourselves interest for that short term.
If it's less than a month, you don't have to. If you have to record an interfund loan, then you do have to charge yourself market rate interest.
Susan, can you please can everyone just turn on their microphones thank you.
What is what? I'm sorry.
What is that interest rate?
So each month it would be different. So it's whatever the prevailing rate is at the banks at the time.
So like this month?
So it's in the 3.5% right now.
So I don't want to sidetrack us, but this current policy may need to be revisited. Maybe 10% is too low.
Because I think the 10% was set when we entered that last recession, if I remember correctly.
Probably, and we were way below that. And Mayor Mays always reminds us, in his previous tenure, our fund balance was extremely, extremely low. So that may be something we want to talk about in the fall with the budget committee to kind of revisit that.
Are you saying that the 10% should be more like 17 to 20?
I'm just suggesting we might have a good discussion about whether that 10% is too low and maybe it's more 15 as a floor or 17 or something like that. I'm just saying for future discussion purposes. So.
I agree.
Go ahead.
Is that a state requirement?
It's not just about the cash flow, but it's also about bond rating, borrowing ability.
Correct, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Help the city.
Go ahead, Paul.
The policy to pay the percentage market rate, is that a state requirement or is it our?
It's a best practices. It's a best practices. Katie, do you know from an audit standpoint I know that's how you have to do it. I'm just trying to remember what the rule is behind it.
I've only ever seen market rate.
I know it has to be. I just can't tell you what the rule is behind why it has to be. I know in auditing interfund loans, it has to be.
I can find out, Paul.
guessing it's there.
Just curious.
I'm guessing, it's just a guess, the requirement's there because you're not supposed to mix funds. So I want it to be a loan.
Correct. Okay, so this is the 5-year forecast that is in the proposed budget. And again, just to make sure everyone is tracking, this is the 20% line. And that goes up over time because our revenues go up. It's 20% of operating revenue, correct, Katie? Is that the?
That's correct.
So naturally, we're collecting more revenue year to year. That line's going to go up every year in terms of the target. We are projected, we're right here. We are projecting to be at 35% at the end of this fiscal year. So in another 6 weeks, we'll be done. So that's as of the June 30th, 2019. You've seen we've bumped around. We've been above that line. We were way down here years ago, but we've been doing pretty well. This significant increase here is a big chunk of that was the sale of the property to the school district for the high school. That was unanticipated revenue. We didn't budget. We didn't plan for it. That's a temporary bump. Then there's some savings from personnel costs, positions that weren't filled, and other things. And then the other reason I would say for this bump this past year is development revenue has been higher than what we projected. So we're in good shape. If you didn't look out over 5 years, you'd say everything's rosy. But just cut it off. So this projected line at the end of if the proposed budget gets adopted the way it is, we're projecting to be at 26%. So remember I said we'd eat into our fund balance by about $1.4 million. That is what that is. So we'd still be at the end of next year above that line. 2 years out, we'd be at that 20%, and then we're starting to drift below. That's based on what I've put in my proposed budget. This does not include additional staff in future years. I know we have a goal to add police staff. Some of those positions that I said no to are positions we may need over the next 3 to 5 years. So that does not include positions that I don't feel we have the revenues to support, because all that would show is that line going down like that. And remember, this is a 1-year budget. I'm not supposed to produce a 5-year budget. I'm supposed to produce a 1-year budget and looking out over the horizon. So any questions on this forecast?
Does that include changes to PERS?
So this, excuse me, this includes everything that's included in the proposed budget, which means that this includes exempt staff contributing the 6% employee match as of 7/1 of 2020, so 1 year out. It also includes the URA closing down, and it includes decreasing the amount that we use from the URA based on revised calculations of the cash flow needed by the URA, and that's where you see the line going up from the revenues. Can you go back to the last slide just for a minute? So that red line going up, where it starts to go up a little bit sooner than we may have seen it go up in previous years. I did a revised calculation on the URA and then did some much more precise calculations of what our property taxes would be based on the difference in what the URA would take and what the city would have based on that. And so that's why the revenue line starts to go up sooner. It has to do with the URA. When we get to the URA night, we'll go over that in more detail. So it does include that. It does include the exempt staff with the 6%. It does not include any of the represented staff for that as far as PERS goes. It includes a 7 percentage points increase at the next PERS increase and 5 percentage points for the following one, which is a lot, but it's still on the conservative end of what we may see happening. And then the development includes the development that we know is going to happen. So this is development that's already happening, that's in the works, or that we know is coming in with annexations and the large projects that are on the horizon. and not a lot of significantly other projects, so nothing beyond what we're relatively certain is happening.
So, good segue, PERS. We talk about PERS every year, and lots of talk about PERS in Oregon right now, if you're following what's going on down in the legislature. So, again, I wanted to remember I was using this to educate staff, and I don't think everyone realizes how much we are spending on PERS and how much we will be spending unless something changes drastically. So again, we are approximately right about, are we here? Or are we here?
We're right there.
We're right there. So back in fiscal year 13, so these were actual numbers, and this is just general fund. This is not all funds. This is just the general fund, correct? So we spent slightly less than $1 million on PERS. We are now spending in this budget, the proposed budget, there's a big increase. As you can see, that line goes up almost $2 million. And then it doesn't go up as much, and then another big increase, and then it levels off, and another big increase. So by 2024, which is the end of our 5-year forecast, we'll be spending in the general fund alone over $3 million on PERS. So in 12 years, we're going from essentially slightly below $1 million to $3 million. And the message that I always try to educate employees and friends of mine who try to understand why is this such a problem is this is money that is going to the pension system that isn't going to programs and services and expenses and new programs and more staff and everything else. And that's a pretty, and every city is dealing with this. School districts are dealing with this. I would say that we are in a crisis in the state. So.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Tim, I thought you were going to do some lobbying or go down to Salem and spend some time talking about PERS. Have you done that?
Not in Salem specifically on PERS, other than talking to our elected representatives down there and anyone who will listen. I did do some lobbying on House Bill 2001, but that was a housing bill. There are multiple bills in the legislature right now. They're trying to pass the $2 billion increase to pay for the schools right now, and the word is internally they struck a deal with Betsy Johnson, who wasn't going to vote for it, the one Democrat that wouldn't vote for it unless they had a PERS solution on the table as well. And the word is that deal was struck, but I don't know. The solution, the last time they did it, the court struck it down. And so I'm not sure. I wouldn't count on it at this point until we see it, I guess would be my recommendation.
Do you plan on doing some more work?
Oh, yeah. I think we're all talking as much as we can, as much as they'll listen. Yeah.
So because of that trend, and the trend is going to get worse in the next 4 to 5 years, I'm making a recommendation as part of this budget that we should talk about, because I think it's an important thing to get our arms around. It is unsustainable, and it's ever increasing. And unless the legislature does something, which I'm not hopeful, but they could do something still this session, I'm recommending that we begin to shift the city's payment. Okay, so if you don't understand PERS, there's basically 2 buckets. There's the city pays for people's PERS pension directly, and then we also pay for what's called a 6% employee contribution, which goes into an IAP, which kind of operates like a 401k. So there's 2 buckets that the city contributes to. In most larger cities, and certainly we have paid for both buckets for many years. Smaller cities around the state, actually the employees contribute. But if you start to look at trends, the larger the organization is, the more common it is, because we all also compete in the same marketplace for employees, that the city pays for both sides. I'm recommending that we shift that. Starting next July, so 13, 14 months from now, we would shift that responsibility back to employees. And then we need to negotiate that with our respective unions. So SPOA, our contract with SPOA, we'll probably be negotiating around January 1st. And hopefully we'll have an agreement with our police union July 1st, 2020, and then AFSCME comes a year later, July 1st, 2021. So that's a major shift. And as you can guess, not necessarily one that employees in the organization are happy about. I felt it was very important to put this on the table and give people adequate notice that this might happen. This may not happen if Salem actually does something significant. So, which is one of the reasons I'm recommending to do it a year from now and not sooner. So what does that mean? And I want to get into that. So I, like Tim, like to run lots of different scenarios. So I asked Katie to run a scenario that will never exist. I said, what if, that's what this top line is, so we're right here. What if PERS just stayed where it is? I'm not asking it to go down, but if it stayed pretty much where it is over the next 4 or 5 years, what would our fund balance look like with everything else? And you can see we would be in pretty good shape. And what that tells me is that's how significant these increasing costs are to our general fund. That would be a wonderful world, but that's not the world we live in, or one that I don't think will happen. Then I asked, what if this line here, this 14% line, is what is in the budget, and as Katie said, that includes, starting next year, shifting for exempt employees, that 6% pickup. If we don't do that, keeping everything else the same, this is what the forecast looks like.
The 14% doesn't include AFSCME and SPOA.
It does not. So I said, what if we're successful? Because in a perfect world, all of our employees would be treated the same. What would that look like? And that's what this blue line is. And you see, we'd pretty much bump along the 20% line. Again, this doesn't add any additional officers like we want to do down the road or additional staff. But if we kept everything the same and we were able to shift that responsibility, we would be in pretty good shape. Any questions on that, Nancy? You were looking like you wanted to look.
This is what I was.
Okay. This was more for my staff, just to make sure they understood what the process was. And that's what I presented as an overview to the employees last week. I felt it was probably a good, at least, introduction to the budget. We can start getting into specific details by department, but does anyone have any other questions, more general questions at this point?
What was the staff's reaction? Letting the staff know that in the real world, out here in the public sector, we pay into our own retirement. Sometimes there's matching, some years there's not, depending on whether the companies can afford it. But it went away, meaning company contributions went away quite a while ago. So it's fairly lucky that people get this. And I think it's prevalent in government, but in private sector, it's pretty much a thing of the past. It's a dinosaur.
So the reaction from the employees was pretty much across the board that it wasn't something that anyone was excited about, definitely. There was a split reaction as some people understood, looking at the graphs, it's pretty obvious. Most people felt like it would definitely be taking away the benefits. One of the comments that was most recurring, I would say, is that there would be a significant difficulty with attracting new people to come work for the city if this was different from other cities around us. That was one of the strong concerns. And another concern was that there was a good chance that we could lose some of the staff that had longevity here because of the feeling that we had just gotten everyone up to where they should be with their compensation. And then if you remove this, then the overall amount that they're receiving would then be decreased. And so that's what we heard from the employees.
Of course.
So it sounds like you guys have kind of done your research on other cities around, whether or not this is something that other cities around do. Because I know from school districts, like 80% of the school districts pick up the 6%. So that would be like a huge loss for, like, if one school district didn't do it because so many of the other ones do it. And for like retention of employees and stuff, that is a big benefit.
Could I give some figures?
Yeah.
Just to give people, so, do you mind?
Go ahead.
So for cities, local governments with employees between 1 and 99, so 100 or less, and we're right on the edge of this. So 67% pick up the 6% and 34% do not. So employees pay in 34% of the cities. For cities with between 100 and 500 employees, 90% pick up the 6%. So there's a big jump, but that cut is at 100. And like I said, we're right on that transition. And then for cities larger than 500, it's 91%. So we are more in the pack of the larger cities, and we've recently transitioned. We transitioned in about 2013 from the smaller size cities to the larger size city.
But this is a tool that a lot of the municipalities are considering using to try to combat the PERS problem.
I wouldn't say that a lot are considering. Let's just say that it's one of the options. I wouldn't say that a lot are considering. I would say that we are possibly out there in front of some other ones because people want to see what happens.
It also depends on what their permanent rates are, and when those were set back in, 98?
Earlier than that, actually.
Because some cities have really, like Beaverton's permanent rate, they don't even assess their full permanent rate on property taxes because it's so large. So they're probably in a little bit better shape than like us, where we have a permanent rate that's not really enough to fund what we need to do.
So the permanent rate doesn't affect the PERS rate, but they can increase the property taxes to cover the PERS in some cities.
So in an effort to move along, this issue, while it continues to be really important, I don't know that now is the time for us to delve into this significantly. And I really want to get into staff presentations.
Yep.
So if we might move along, unless there's any other very specific questions to Joe's presentation, I'd like to just move forward.
The one additional comment I will make is I am making this recommendation to implement something a year from now. Ultimately, the city council will decide whether or not to change the current policy. So it won't be the budget committee next year.
Right.
You may talk about it, but it's ultimately the council. But going back to those core values of being fiscally responsible and forward thinking and knowing what the council has identified and as a growing city what we need, if we don't do something like this, in my opinion, we're going to be talking about where to cut city government instead of talking about where do we add city employees. And I know it's not popular, but I don't always make people happy. And I also have told people I'm affected by this pretty significantly as well. So it's a big deal to employees, and I get it. And I've heard that, and we'll continue the conversation between now and next year in terms of whether we need to do this or not. Again, if something significant happens out of Salem, this may not be necessary. So, okay, with that, we'll leave this issue alone for now. So.
All right. Then let's go into general fund presentations, starting with administration.
Katie, you and I are going to tag team to make sure we're on the right page.
So we'll be starting in pages 53 through 61 in the budget book is where administration starts. And if you have the additional handout, and if anyone in the audience or anyone from the senior leadership or others need that one, there are extra copies here on the corner of the table. If anyone doesn't have it, that show the order that we'll be going in and which departments are presenting next. So if anyone doesn't have it, there's extras on the corner here.
And as we get to department directors and program directors, they'll be coming up here, sitting next to me about their specific budgets. So
The one thing I'd like to just remind the Budget Committee is in an effort to encourage our meeting to move along, as opposed to going through line by line and the minutia of all of the dollars and cents and every line item, I'd really like to give staff and Joe and Katie the opportunity to do a more global overview and let us focus on our comfort level with if we feel like the budget will indeed serve the citizens of Sherwood adequately. So with that in mind, let's get started.
Okay, so I will start with the non-departmental.
Yep.
There's just one item that you should be aware of, and that is that in this upcoming year, we are proposing that the general fund pay the actual cost of broadband. Broadband is a growing utility, and with it growing and offering services to the general fund, and it pays franchise fees just like any other utility, there's a cost to broadband of providing services. And in the past couple of years, there has been a discount given to the general fund. And in this proposed budget, we are proposing that the general fund pay the actual cost of broadband services to broadband, as opposed to this highly, highly discounted rate to broadband. One of the reasons for this is when Brad comes up to discuss IT, he's going to talk about moving more of his time over to broadband. We will be talking about having there's a one-time request to do a review of how we deliver administrative overhead, how we allocate it. But as it stands right now, it's allocated based on personnel cost. So with him spending more time over there, we now have this increased personnel cost, which means broadband is picking up a huge amount of the overhead. And so by us decreasing what the general fund is paying and them paying a huge amount of overhead, it's causing them to have an abnormally large amount of overhead costs that a utility really shouldn't have. And so for this 1 year, until we get this overhead calculated and carefully done, we need to be paying broadband the actual cost of operations so that they can go expand their business like they want to, like council wants them to, like we're trying to, and so that they can actually reflect the true benefit and the true cost of the utility so that we can move forward and see what it's costing them to do operations and how we expand and go forward. That's the one big change in non-departmental, and you see that in line 6308 in your detail. It's called internet access. So if anyone's wondering why our internet access more than doubled, it's because we're trying to get broadband going fully. And that's literally the only thing that I need to point out, I think, in the non-departmental section. And there's no personnel that's accounted for in there. It's just the general overall bills. Do you want to cover city council?
yes. So city council is, if you look, again, we're on page 54 in the book, and then the details are right next to it. There is a slight increase overall in the proposed budget for the council. I think the largest increase to note would be 6209, which is travel and training. We bumped that up to 12,630. That accounts for more travel essentially to DC. We're seeking to bring more federal dollars here. You'll see in my city manager budget an increase related to working with CFM, our federal lobbyist. And we were not doing that for a number of years, and we anticipate that that will be happening next year, and that's one of the reasons you'll see that budget going up. Everything else in the city council budget? Usually it's both. So usually if it's an elected, in this case, it's usually Mayor Mays or the council president going, and we always have a staff person accompanying our electeds.
But if a staff person accompanies, it's not in this
In
line
this
item,
budget.
it's in a different one.
We have a consulting firm that helps us lobby in DC that is with us on those trips.
So any other, the city council budget is not a very large budget. It's a total expenses of $28,000. So any burning questions on the council's budget? Seeing none, I'm going to switch to the city recorder. Sylvia Murphy could not be here tonight due to a vacation that was planned many months ago. I asked her for, and I passed this around, basically her synopsis of why she asked for increased hours for her records tech position. And you can see the differences and why she asked for those. Essentially, it's to help with implementing our new records management system, as she states there, which is going quite well, actually, but slow, as she would describe down in the bottom section of that. And she has essentially asked for additional hours for that position to kind of move that project faster and moving ahead faster than what we're doing. She does cite some important things. We cut last year an IT position. That without that position, that also contributes a little bit of delay in terms of working on the new system. Brad can talk about that when he comes and talks about IT, but there is an impact of reducing that position from last year, and I think Sylvia feels that as she's trying to implement this new system. And then we are proposing, or I'm proposing, to eliminate the legal assistant position, and there's 50 plus boxes, as she cites in there, that she's concerned that will not be digitized in a quick manner. So she touches every department because as a records person, she needs to coordinate all those records management things. So this is, I wanted her to speak for herself. She couldn't be here, so that's why I had to put this together. So Susan, did you have a question?
Well, it kind of flows between hers and yours about the legal assistant. So are we proposing for this budget cycle that our attorney has no assistant?
Our attorney, and Josh, when he talks about the attorney budget, can answer directly. Tina Olette, who is my executive assistant, would pick up some of his administrative support. She sits right outside his office, like mine. He's also using legal interns more, and so for some of the legal work, and again, he can specifically respond to that, he feels comfortable with this loss of the position.
Do you feel like we're in any way gutting our legal department?
No. Again, you can ask the city attorney that, but in my opinion, if we were gutting the department, I wouldn't put this on the table. So.
He still has adequate resources.
Yep. Any question about the city recorder's budget? As she says, she's one of the smallest departments in the city.
And the follow-up
So
to that is, you're just talking about temporarily that legal assistant taking that out for this budget cycle, right?
no. I'm proposing to eliminate that position. You can ask Josh. When Josh comes up here, ask him.
Okay. How much of Tina's time does he do?
Probably 30% is what he said. Okay. There's nothing in the city recorder's budget. City manager's budget is next. This is on page 56 with the details right next to it. You'll notice last year's major cut with the assistant city manager. If you look at personnel services in 17-18, it was $425,000. Now we're down to $272,000 in the city manager's office. This is a portion of my time as city manager and Tina's time, essentially, are the two members of the city manager's office in terms of personnel. The big increase, if you compare this year to next year's proposed, is in 6198. You'll see $55,000 being proposed. That's the CFM contract. That's our lobbyist in DC. We didn't do a full year this year. That's why it's only projected to be 45,000 at the end of this year. And I'm hoping that some of that initial work that Mayor Mays and Brad went last month to DC to meet with our lobbyists and our congressional delegation. We'll be applying for a number of federal funds that hopefully will bring some of those monies back to Sherwood in broadband, and there's some other things in terms of law enforcement and school funding that we're working on right now, and then hopefully in the future some transportation and infrastructure funding. So you spend a little bit of money, but hopefully you can bring back significant federal dollars. That's the intent.
Is the school helping pay for a portion of this, or
No.
are we doing that?
No, we're doing this. The funding that would benefit schools is for law enforcement to help better protect schools.
So for our budget, so last year, or this one is getting ready to end, the 45,000, 46,000 that we paid to them, what do you think? Did we bring anything in as a result of that, or?
We have not received any federal dollars yet since we reestablished our contract with CFM, so.
So no return on investment.
Not at this point. But I will tell you with what's going on in DC, and it's always kind of crazy in DC. So the application that Brad is working on for broadband, the details of that were just finally released a couple weeks ago, and that is due in mid-June. And they're still releasing the details about how to apply for those. They're running by the seat of their pants. And quite honestly, without CFM's kind of bird dogging that and staying on top of that, we would be at a loss compared to where we are. So I think it's a worthwhile investment that will pay dividends ultimately. And I think it's a council directive. It just happens to be in my budget.
And I don't think something like that always is a return on investment immediately.
Correct.
Sometimes it takes more time.
Any other questions about the city manager's budget specifically that I can answer? Mr. City Attorney, thank you for joining us.
There you go. That's my name. So I have two items to highlight in my budget. One's already been discussed a little bit, but I'm happy to answer further questions about that. That's the elimination of the legal assistant position. You may recall in the last budget cycle that went from a 1.0 FTE in my department to a split position with finance, 0.6 FTE in finance and 0.4 in my department. This would eliminate that, and so there would be 0 support staff in my department. As Joe mentioned, the plan is to shift those responsibilities largely to Tina, approximately 0.3 FTE in terms of her time. So that'd be a slight reduction from the current amount of admin support time that I have. That will be offset to some degree. The plan is also by the expansion of the law clerk program, as highlighted at the bottom of my overview sheet. We've had great success with that in past years, but it's been a summer-only position. This year, the selected candidate has committed to a full year, working here full-time, or not full-time, but year-round. So that should be a significant benefit. The other item that I want to highlight is the outside legal services budget, which is line item 6104. As you can see, since I've been working here full-time, that's consistently been a very small amount, but we are budgeting a significant increase there, and there is more projected spend this year than in past years. That's all due to City Council hired a outside labor attorney for labor negotiations. That's what that's based on. Happy to answer any questions.
So Josh raises a good point. He actually has a full-time position that I'm proposing to eliminate. His department only had 0.4 of that full-time. So it's not like he's losing a full-time person. He's losing a 0.4 position, but he's gaining 30% of Tina's time and a full year of the intern. Well, yeah, 110.
Adding the law clerk.
But adding a year-long law clerk. So we think that this will work.
Skill
So
level's what you need? I mean, it's not like you can just, in a legal assistant, it's just not like a secretary. I mean, they usually have specific legal training for the documents and the deadlines and all of that kind of stuff.
Right. We're really talking about three different types of positions: a legal assistant, a general admin assistant, and a law clerk or legal intern, which is a law student. So in this case, she'll be starting after completing her second year of law school. So she's 2/3 of the way through law school. So what all those positions can do, the work that they can do is different. But the general kind of administrative work, I'm fully confident that Tina will be able to handle all of that. She'll be great at that. The more legal leaning work, that will go to the intern. Their skill level and experience level and abilities can vary greatly. They tend to have more theoretical training than practical training, but we'll see what we can do.
Do you feel like this will leave a hole in the city's ability to process what you process today?
I wouldn't say a hole. I think if anything, it will be more of a challenge in terms of scheduling and competing priorities and workloads. It may result in slower response times on some items, just because if Joe needs Tina's time for something in particular and I need her time for something at the same time, we're having to balance those priorities. That's more of a new challenge that we'll have to deal with. But I wouldn't consider it a hole.
Were you somewhat having to do that with finance as well already?
We, for the most part, stuck to a strict schedule based on time. So when she was on legal time, she was just doing legal work and vice versa.
So are we going to get into the situation where, like, if you have an increase of time of things that you need to do just across the board, whatever is going on with the city, not labor this time, it's something else. Are we going to get into the situation where we're going to be penny wise and pound foolish, that we end up, we're taking away time for you to have support, and then we farm it out, and then it's not centralized, and then you've got managing what we farm out. Do you see what I'm saying? That I think we want to make sure that you have the support, and that we're looking at the long end of it, not just like because you're talking about shaving a little bit, but every little bit, especially for our legal department with its deadlines and very specific requirements, you're not just taking out an admin or a secretary.
Right. So as you can see from our past spending in the outside legal services, we farm out very little. I'm not projecting that to change, but if our experience is different over the next year, we can reevaluate. But at this point, I'm not anticipating, other than, of course, outside labor attorney services, I'm not projecting a significant change in terms of how much work we're farming out.
And that wasn't farmed out because you didn't have the time to do that work. Council just felt that we needed a specific labor negotiator.
Right, that was very specific. Yeah.
And Josh, I'm guessing some of the other time that you farmed out, it's where you needed a specific legal expertise that you didn't necessarily have too.
Exactly. So I've talked about this with council, but my general approach to that is I do as much of the work in-house as I can. I contact an outside expert to kind of point me in the right direction or answer questions, and then I go and do the legwork myself. So that the amount of time that we are actually having them bill us for is minimal, like a 20-minute phone call rather than actually doing the work.
And if it changes, you're not going to be shy, either one of you, to tell us that you need more support.
No.
Thank you, Josh.
okay, with that, I'm going to tackle the HR budget. Christina is not here tonight as the HR manager. I still am the HR director. It's one of the hats that I wear. I feel very fortunate to have Christina Jones as our HR manager. She's been here a little little less than a year. She joined us from California and brings tremendous experience in city and county government in California to us. And she's quickly learning how Oregon works and how we're different than California in lots of ways. So the one thing that she has requested that, again, I didn't fund, but you may see this request as we grow as an organization over time, was an HR tech type position, which is kind of an admin, lower HR position to help with recruitments and just kind of the process to keep everything moving forward in terms of the day-to-day HR function. That would enable her to focus on larger projects like updating the employee manual, which is something that she is leading this year. And hopefully by the time we have these conversations next year, that will be an accomplishment that she will have behind her. So her budget is essentially not significantly different this year. Again, there was a position she asked for that I felt we couldn't afford at this time.
But we're well ahead of, because we have a full-time, whereas previous years we had one person filling a half-time.
Correct.
Comp development HR.
Yes. Yeah. And that HR tech, the way it was, I want to say this before she talks about court, is because we use Tina, my assistant, to back up court stuff as well. That HR tech, if we had that, would also be a backup for the court to deal with volumes and stuff like that and some of the finance stuff. So,
So the position was requested as 50% HR tech, 30% court, and 20% finance, just for the record.
So is this 96,811?
what line number?
Yes.
Oh. No, I'm looking
No,
at
that,
yes.
that is Christina's, that's the HR manager's position.
Okay.
She's looking at this piece.
Okay, so she requested an HR tech.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought the 91,190 that's in the budget is the HR manager's.
Right. So I was looking at page 1 of 32 in the.
The 96,811 is the
Correct.
full position, the HR tech position,
Okay.
fully loaded.
All right. So that would have been the additional.
That
Correct.
would have been the additional amount. That would have been 50% HR tech, 30% court, and 20% finance.
Thank you.
Is that picked up anywhere else, like in your finance? Are you picking up that 20%?
No, we,
So you're going to spread it out among what you currently have.
that's right. Go team. We do have a great one.
So what's next in the order?
Brad.
Brad,
IT.
IT.
That was HR?
That was
That was
HR.
HR.
yes. Do you have any, were there questions?
Just to make sure everyone's on the same page, we're on page 59 of the budget book.
Good evening. I'm not going to go through the details of the IT budget, but happy to answer any questions on it. It's a pretty standard budget, with exception of some capital replacements. Did want to touch on a little bit of the loss of the business analyst last year and just reiterate the impact that has on our IT department. Business analyst is kind of a unique position, but a very valuable one. It's kind of the conduit between the business side of the city and the technical side, and helps with a lot of innovation, helps with a lot of project implementation, making sure things get done in an effective and efficient manner. With the loss of that position, a lot of those responsibilities went to me, and quite honestly, with the rise of broadband, that's not happening, and probably won't happen just because of the growth that broadband is seeing lately. So. Just want to put that out there. That is a huge need for us. We are now, with my job being split 50-50 between broadband and IT now, we're at a staffing level that we were at in 2005. I'm sure you guys can all understand technology's changed a lot since 2005. So the world we were in the city compared to 2005 it was now, it's not even imaginable. I mean, it's different. So just want to put that out there. That is still a dramatic need for our department, and one that I think probably needs to be addressed at some other future budget year. So with that, I'm happy happy to answer any questions.
So, what, you're saying you're 50-50 between city and broadband now. What were you prior?
25, 75.
25 broadband?
75 IT, 25 broadband, yeah.
General fund?
Yeah.
So with the broadband pays its own fund, so with this moving of 25% over there, is there not, obviously, there's not funds to have funded his IT tech by moving part of his salary over to?
I think if you look, the regular salaries and wages did go down, but I think PERS took up a lot of that too. So there was a decrease. There was a decrease there.
And the business manager that we're talking about overall to come in would have nothing to do with what Brad is trying to do.
You talking about the economic development manager? No. This person is part end user focused support person to kind of take a load off of the technical guys, but largely she spent a ton of time with Sylvia developing the records management program and getting us ready to go to this trim product. She worked a ton with the business license program. If a department wants to implement new software, she's the one that I put as the go-between between IT and us. She can tell them what IT can do and what abilities are out there, and to ensure that we're thinking through all of the capabilities of what a software can do. Without her, Katie gets to implement a business license application, or Craig and his group get to do, public works software, which they're doing a great job, but it's just, I think there's a gap there, and a lot of innovation and forward thinking, not to use words from the council goals, but that's where that happens. So.
And what you're trying to do in the way of grants that we're trying to pursue, would that help with that, or is that just...
The grants are really on the broadband side, or the grant that we're pursuing is on the broadband side. So what we want to do and what we're trying to do is, have people that are dual capabilities, right? So we were looking for ways where we can take IT guys and give them maybe a little bit of broadband experience, and so that we can kind of share the load a little bit. But right now, broadband has got more work than it probably has bodies to do. It's hard to do that.
So, some questions.
Yeah.
Okay. And Nick, as Katie's outlined, the cost of bringing that back is about $113,000. So it's not inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
That's a little more than the 25% that moved over to broadband. That got eaten up by PERS.
And I would say that's a case of a position that we could have. We would definitely invest in. As Brad constantly reminds me that we are feeling the loss of that elimination last year. So.
I can just echo that as someone who works in that type of industry. That is a very vital role. Yep. So it'd be good to get it back at some point.
So is anybody talking about we're trying to add more police officers? Are we doing it to the detriment of some of our core, like this, that's a core part of?
Well, you haven't heard from the police department yet.
Right.
I think that's important to hear that. Council has identified implementing that police staffing plan. I believe we need to implement that police staffing plan as well as other things. So if we were only funding additional police officers, I'd say, yeah, maybe. But there's a lot of other positions that are in our proposed budget. And it's a balancing of priorities. There's priorities throughout the organization. But I tend to believe if we don't do what we need to do over the next 2 to 3 years to figure out how to beef up our police department, suddenly we're going to be at a point where we don't want to be as a community. And Chief Broke can talk about that.
Right. And we don't want to go critical on our IT either.
No, and I don't think we're at any risk of going critical with our IT. If things take a little longer and people have to pick up the slack, that's just the way we do that all the time here. That's nothing new. But if, and you'll hear this a lot, if we don't have enough officers and calls for service are going up and we don't have sergeants on duty to do supervisory responsibilities, there's a potential risk of life. And I don't take that lightly. So it's tough choices when you don't have enough money to do everything you need to do. We are a very safe community right now, but as you saw in the data, calls for services are going up, response times are going down. You heard from the DA. We are proud of being a safe community. If
So
we
Joe,
don't,
not to cut you off, but maybe we should wait to focus on police when Chief has an opportunity to present.
but I'm responding to the question,
Yeah, I
are
appreciate
we,
that.
putting all our resources in the police department and not doing things over here? And I don't think that's the case. But the priority in this budget is police and economic development.
I have a couple questions for Brad.
Yeah.
Hey, Brad, why are we increasing the number of applications supported? Is it more of the software packages?
Yeah, we're, I unfortunately didn't bring my list up there.
That's
But yeah,
totally fine.
we're always adding an application here or there, and with the
We're retiring some or are we just getting new?
seems like we're always just getting new. Unfortunately, with the advent of software as a service, now you've got all these different little applications that do very focused little applications, and it's time tracking and it's time card, not time card, but just all kinds of little things that have now become available and at a price point that's pretty reasonable, where we wouldn't have bought them before.
And why do you anticipate being 15, desktops, computer systems less? We're replacing a bunch. Are we not? Where are those other 15 going? What happened to those other 15?
I'd have to look at see which ones we got rid of. We did a whole analysis when we were going through the whole new desktops, and I think 250 is where we landed on. Might be the laptop side. I'd have to go look that up and get back to you. Which ones are being gotten rid of?
And one last, why do you think those help desk tickets are going to go up significantly to 900 tickets is what you anticipate over what we've had before? Is that the new?
It's nothing new. What I struggle with all the time is getting actual help desk tickets in a help desk ticket system, because we're so easy to just come and grab us, or call us on the phone. So to be completely honest with you, these numbers are a little bit misnomer, because I think Mark, who's our one guy that really does service requests, would tell you that he gets as many walk-ins as he does tickets. These are actually tickets that came from our ticketing system, and I think I estimated that it would just be a little higher, but real actual numbers are much greater than that.
And admin's probably the worst at that because of
No comment.
accessibility.
Let's just say they've been asking us to please go back and submit a ticket. So if we start to do what we're supposed to do, the number's going to go up. So they've been enforcing that a little bit more lately.
Well, and I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but the business analyst is an important piece, but just the day-to-day stuff is getting hard for us, and the business analyst picks up a little bit of that load, but I would be remiss if I didn't say something, because I think poor Mark Sorensen is drowning right now, but doing a great job. So
I just have one question. The one-time dollars coming from the general fund to broadband, what is that going to pay for?
Back into broadband revenue. So the city has about 60 sites, I believe, that are using broadband connections. And we came up with a model a while back, and I think it was something like $75 per site that we would charge, regardless if it was an internet connection or a dark fiber connection or whatever. And the city or the broadband utility has been given the general fund a discount, I think, for the last 2 years of 50% off of that. So I think this year that shores that up. And there was a little bit extra in there to offset me going 50-50 and the additional overhead costs that broadband utility is paying back into the general fund.
So it wasn't a one-time cost. It was bringing the cost, it was getting rid of the discount and bringing the city's cost to the actual cost.
So I'm going to clarify that. You keep using the word cost. I want to make sure we're talking about
Charge.
Retail price. We're charging the city the same retail price we would charge a private
Not really.
customer.
I mean,
Or are we talking cost as in COGS?
we had to come up with a cost, right? So we would never sell a dark fiber connection between 2 points for $75 a month. I mean, that would be an incredible deal, but we felt like that was a low enough number for a great enough service. But I had to come up with a number, right? Typically, our dark fiber rates are $150 a mile, I mean, on the commercial side. So it's a discount, but I had to come up with a number that was divisible by all the different sites.
So less of a discount than before, but it's still discounted over
Absolutely.
public rates.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sorry, did that answer your question?
Yeah, what was that total amount again?
The overall total,
I think that the original full rate was like 60 some K, I believe. Yeah.
Brad,
okay.
Which I believe, I mean, because I wanted to check myself. A while back ago, I checked to see what other cities paid for their telecom service that didn't have broadband utilities. And 60K is about what people pay when you count their internet connection and all their site-to-site connections for all their buildings.
I was just thinking of it more in terms of if we have wiggle room on those discounts and we can keep money in the general fund for police and other things, we should be seriously considering that. So that's why I was asking.
so the two numbers were 57,600 and then 40,000 was the additional amount. So we had, the original amount was the 57,600 and then we added the $40,000 to bring it back up to the full amount.
Explain, is it that broadband needed the money back in there?
It's that in order for, there has been push for broadband to move forward with the utility, for the utility itself to move forward. In order for the utility to move forward, it needs to be recovering its costs. And so in order for the utility to recover its costs, one of its main customers is the general fund. So the general fund needs to pay the utility because they are two separate funds. With the idea of broadband pushing forward, it has to have a fund balance in order to make this progress, in order to move forward. So to have that fund balance, it needs to build a general fund for the utility it's getting.
We give the school district a discount too, don't we? Or are they?
They're not.
We charge them at, a discounted rate.
Are they still get the discounted rate, or are we having them go up too?
They've been under contract for years, so they're paying the same price that they've always paid. Which is a discount, yeah. I mean, we don't, every customer that leases dark fiber from us is different because, right, everybody needs it from different point A to point B. So to say it's a set price and a discount, there's no such thing when it comes to that dark fiber world. We negotiate with them and said, what's a reasonable price? And that's what we charge them.
How long is that contract until?
Gosh, I have to look at it again. I mean, it's several years out still. I don't know offhand.
Does broadband have its own budget? Are we going to be?
We'll be doing broadband will be on next week's.
Thank you, Brad.
Yep.
Let's move into finance.
Okay, so Lisa, if you'll come up and join us. And we're going to do finance and court sort of together. They're two separate budgets, but one of the things as we get more and more lean is that finance and court are both under me, and finance and court need to work together in order for us to survive. But Lisa is our court supervisor, and we've made a lot of changes within finance and within court as to how things are run, and we've been looking at all of the operations, every process that we do. So we've been looking at everything from start to finish. Everything we touch, is it an efficient process? Is there a better way to do it? Is there a faster way to do it? Are we duplicating things? All of that. So this is going on in both finance and in court. And this is one of the reasons that that we have said that one of the positions in our team, which is the shared legal and finance position, that position is actually, with the new processes, causes inefficiencies. And so the 0.6% of that position, we are saying we can do things more efficiently without that position than we can with the position because of the financial abilities of the people in the accounting and finance tech positions who are not administrative staff, but by doing them directly by the people who have the capabilities and the training in the accounting, and then taking things directly to the software. So not going through paper. We're trying to get things to paperless ways, getting them directly in the system, and eliminating as much of the administrative and paperwork part of things. And so as we do that, we're fine-tuning and refining down what we need people to do and the steps that we do. And part of that also is on Lisa's side of things, they're looking to take things out of the paper world because court is drowning in papers. And we are not quite at the point where we can function with just the staff that we've requested in the budget right now. Just so you know, that there will not be enough, but we're confident that if we can get the paperless processes in place that we're working towards, that we will be able to do it with the staff that we've requested. And we have a meeting the 29th, I think it is, with full court to go over the current software we have and the imaging module to see if we can do it within the software that we have to take some of the processes we have digitally. And we're also working with the DMV to work on getting the
conviction project.
So she's working with DMV to get out all of the records going through electronically instead of all these papers. So it's well underway. I can't say that we're quite there yet, but once that is done, we're confident that we can pare this down a little further even. So that's why we believe that we can do with these cuts in staff that we are proposing, and that we can make it work, even though we've had a huge increase in volume and the staff has been just working their tails off. And that's why you're not seeing any requests, even though we are seeing increased work. We're just moving people around. We've done a restructuring in finance. Leslie, who is at the back over there, has been promoted to accounting supervisor. And so we've moved positions around so that the reporting structure is a little bit different, and increasing efficiencies there. So that's what's happening in finance and court. The biggest thing that you will see in finance is a one-time request for implementation of some labor software. And this has to do with, as we're heading into negotiations, it's a way to cost what will happen. And those of you who were able to attend when we had a consultant come and show the software, it allows us to see not only the current year of a contract that we're doing, but further down the road, and what are the implications of decisions that are made in negotiations, and allows us to better cost out what employees, what benefits cost, and just everything that's involved instead of just salaries or whatever decisions that we make. So there's a one-time implementation cost and then an ongoing cost, and that is included in the budget.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
So I saw the 21,000 roughly. That's the implementation cost. I assume what's the ongoing maintenance per year?
No, the 21,000 is not
something different. Okay.
That line went up significantly.
So
6216.
Got my papers out of order here. Okay, so in 6216, the labor costing itself, the one time is 6,500. The ongoing cost is 6,000. And then the 5cast, which is the model that we use for the 5-year forecasting that we can run all the different scenarios in, is 8,300. And that was in there, it was just moved up from a different line.
Those are all annual. Well, the 6,000 and the 8,000 are annual.
That's correct. Only the 6,500 is a one-time.
That's included in the 21.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And that podcast was budgeted in a different line item. The current year.
Last year it was in a line item below.
It was projected there. We had actually budgeted it clear up in professional services. We've been trying to figure out for these these softwares that they're out there and we don't own anything. We just go online. And so we don't even own the software anymore. And we're trying to figure out the best way to account for these. And that's why they're kind of moving around.
I think you have it in the right place, personally.
And so we moved it down there to say, okay, software subscription seems like the logical place. So that's why it's down there for this year, coming year.
I have a two-part question for
Yes.
Lisa and you, Katie, on court costs. And actually, I may have to defer to Josh on this too, but without funding, well, let me start over. How much do you interface with the city recorder's office, if at all, in terms of digitizing records and record management?
We just recently implemented that, so all the court staff now have a scanner at our desks, and so I think we're up to, I want to say like a couple thousand records already. We have worked it into our workflow, and so we just rolled our sleeves up and just
Scan
hit
as
it.
you go.
Yep.
So the 50 boxes or 50 plus boxes that Sylvia addresses in her narrative, is there, and maybe Josh, this is for you, is there a legal ramification to not having that accessible? No. Quickly accessible? No?
They're paper records instead of being digitized. And
Well, I'm just talking about efficiency. Efficiency. There's a cost to staff time and having to go through boxes as opposed to being able to quickly access records. And I think that affects all staff. So I'm just wondering what you think.
Definitely an efficiency aspect to it, not really a legal one. If we get a public records request or a discovery request, we still have the records. We'll still be able to produce them.
Sure.
It'll just take us longer to find them.
Yeah.
Do we store all those on site here? We don't.
I believe they're all
send
on
them off
site.
to like
All
an-
on site, yes.
Okay,
And
and
I
I
just-
like an Iron Mountain.
How often does that occur?
Well, in municipal court, it varies, but I'll tell you, to dig through a box, if you have like 10 boxes, you don't have any idea. You're going through hundreds of records. And of course, it's at the very last box at the end.
Of course.
So,
yeah, and that was ultimately my concern.
Right. Well, already, since we started the digital program with Sylvia, I think we've utilized it like 3 or 4 times. And then so, people call for various reasons. They maybe want to come in and see the judge, or it doesn't,
Whatever.
Yeah, and so we'll have the record and then have it available. And then if we need to revise it, then we just revise it and it goes back into the system. So it's very handy.
But there's always an ROI aspect of this as well, because, only a tiny percentage of records ever need to get pulled, right?
Yeah.
But if you digitize them all, you spend a definitive amount of time. So I mean, there's doing the digitization. So in the moment, it's painful, and I'm not saying I don't know the answer. I'm just saying that's an equation that's hard to necessarily figure out.
Well, I'll tell you,
Where
when
is that 5 years down the road, 7 years down the road, where you hit the ROI point for doing upfront digitization. Sorry.
again, I would, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe you're getting a tremendous amount of requests for information from 5 years ago for a traffic ticket that you
Yeah.
have to go searching through boxes for.
And ultimately, I suppose this is just one piece of the record-keeping process, and that is really my bigger concern in not affording the records or the city recorder additional time. So just something to keep in mind as we get through other departments.
And I think the attempt is for the current work that they're doing, getting that digitized, so you're not creating a larger and larger backlog. And we will get to the backlog and get it in the system now that we have a system. It might just take a little longer
Time.
because without that individual that Sylvia asked for.
Yeah.
That's the case throughout the organization.
That's, yeah.
And I would
that's what
say,
mean.
compared to even just a year ago, because we have this new system, which is working very well, actually the state is very pleased with how we're doing things and is looking to us as an example how to roll out this system. And that's largely Sylvia's leadership.
Yeah.
She just wants it done quicker.
Sure, and that's assuring, and
I
that's
get that.
and that's how great she is. So, all right, thank you.
Joe, could some of that be done by volunteers?
Yes, for some stuff, not court stuff though, because of the sensitivity of the information and what's on there. For example, I'm not lead certified. I could not go in there and look at certain information because I don't have that certification, and volunteers wouldn't. So there are limitations on the type of record who can have access to it. Other types of records that don't have those, we do use volunteers currently to get information into the system, into the record system.
And how do you publicize that, the need for volunteers to do that?
Tammy Steffens can talk about that when we get to the volunteer program, but she's always looking for volunteers and advertises through Facebook and other means to get volunteers. So.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to digress, but I just thought.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Josh.
Yep. I have a question, and so do you. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. You can go first.
I have a comment and a question around the operating expense per processed violation. So first of all, I'm going to say I'm completely ignorant of whatever needs to get done for that, but that number seems shockingly high to me. So that's my comment. My question is, why is it projected to increase by so much next year? I would expect, it sounds like we were introducing efficiencies, so I would actually expect it to be going down.
PERS.
All of that $7 increase is PERS.
It's pretty much PERS. I mean, it really is.
But so what's the real gain in PERS then? Because if we're lowering the number due to efficiencies, but we're still gaining $7 overall, then is the cost associated with PERS $10, $12? Like
so right now we have 2 temps doing the work. So we have 1 temp that's currently working 50 to 60 hours a week. We have another temp that's currently working at least 15 to 20 hours a week. We have finance who's currently working in court, and we have all of court staff. That's a lot of people. So we're requesting to reduce that down. But all of that staff hasn't been the whole year. And so the total cost for the year is, we've had a good portion of the year, for example, where if Lisa works overtime, there's no extra cost because she's exempt. If I'm in here on a Saturday pulling dockets, there's no extra cost because I'm exempt. There's a lot of people that do a lot of work where there's no extra cost. The temps that are doing the work right now, they have no PERS. When we do hire them on, they have PERS, they have benefits. So a person who's currently working 50 to 60 hours a week at nearly minimum wage, who comes on as an actual employee, will cost a lot more because PERS.
So the answer is the reason we expect it to go up is that you're converting people from temporary to full-time who are doing this work, as well as you're using more hourly employees and less salaried employees. That answers my question.
Okay.
And maybe a suggestion for next year, have another line there that has that number without PERS, so you can kind of see how you're doing
on
just pure efficiency basis.
Yep.
That's a good
Did
idea.
you still have a question?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to ask, it sounds like there's a number of different software implementations going on across various departments, and with the elimination of the business analyst, it sounds like a lot of that implementation work is being borne by the departments themselves. Is there some way to track or at least keep track of the amount of time people are spending doing implementation work?
Sorry. I'm just laughing because poor Leslie back there just might throw something across the room right now. She's been spending so many hours on software implementation that's gone awry.
No, and that's kind of the root of my question is not having a position like a business analyst kind of, or like kind of penny wise, pound foolish, where we're saving money on one position, but costing ourselves more than one position in both the time people are spending and the inefficiency of having a non-business analyst staff do business analyst work.
Probably means they're less efficient. They're increasing the time under delivery and possibly less innovative, and that's not a knock on anybody.
Right. And yeah, not to mention, functionality that might be missed or software that could be implemented that ends up not being implemented because there's not bandwidth.
And no, we have not been tracking that.
Well, I think it's certainly worth keeping that on our radar as we continue through the budget.
Any other questions for Lisa? She's well prepared, people.
I just have a question. Why do we think our parking ticket count is going to go up 20?
It's just a wild guess. It varies. Sometimes it's 10, and it just depends.
I got my own warning. So I will tell you, when the finance director gets a warning for having their car parked in the city hall parking lot, there's going to be more parking violations. So I'm defending the increase in the parking things.
That's code compliance, Gina?
No, it was the sergeant, the police. I live next door, and it was the middle of the night, I confess.
You just didn't move your car.
I just didn't move my car.
Here when those places got built.
Yes. And you only got a warning.
But the point in that is, as we were discussing the parking violations, and I did have a nice orange sticker on my car, was that I'm not alone. I live close to here, and the more places that we pack into here that don't have a place to park, they will be forced to actually give people parking violations because there will be more things like this. So we actually believe that increase is lower than it may be. We're just not sure how many will just be warnings and how many will actually be carried through to the violations. So that was a joke, but it was actually the actual true.
How much revenue we missed out when we didn't give you a real ticket?
I know.
All right.
$25.
I was just going to say, if you're looking for 20 extra tickets, I know some places you can go.
Well, when the chief comes up, talk to the chief. She doesn't issue the tickets, so they just process them.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Before we head into community development, we're just at about the 2-hour mark. Let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll be right back. And we're going to just jump right into community development. Okay, we will do that.
By the agenda.
Yeah.
It's not the next
Yeah.
in the book.
It's
not the next page. It's on page 69 in
You
your
guys are
budget.
tricking us.
Yeah, come on.
All right. All right. So we'll toggle back to 62 in a little while.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
I'm ready, Kristen.
So we were asked to really just focus on changes in FTEs within our department. So that's what I'm going to do. And if there's any other questions, of course, we're happy to answer them and are prepared to do so. But if it seems really brief, that is why. So there was 2 areas that we asked for additional staffing in community services. The first is the senior center, and the second is the library. So Maya is here tonight to talk about what we asked for in the senior center and what won't happen because we did not include it in the budget. And the one thing that I want to point out is this is one of the city council goals of livability is to work on programs at the senior center. So if I was going to pick or prioritize, that would be my priority. So.
Versus the library.
Versus the library, yes.
No
and
offense to
frankly,
the
any of the other departments. Sorry.
Tim, can you put that microphone? Oh, I guess she's going to move that one.
And Adrian knows that, so it's not a surprise to her. She understands that being one of the council goals, that's our priority, and that's where we really want to focus our resources this year. If we could have everything, that would be fantastic. But if we get to an opportunity where we can add something back in for community services, it's the senior center we want to really focus on this year. So this is Maya, and I want her to speak just a little bit about, as you saw, it was really just a few hours, 3 hours for the chef, the kitchen coordinator, 3 hours a week, and 5 hours for her position. So I want to talk about what programs we would do if we had those hours or what's not going to get done.
Yeah. So I'll start with the kitchen coordinator going up 3 hours a week or adding $5,468 to our yearly budget. Without that, we can't offer the cooking classes that we were wanting to offer. We ran a pilot program this spring. The cooking classes sold out almost instantaneously. It was a lot of people who didn't know how to cook, who had spouses that had passed away and needed to learn how to cook, or people who are recently retired and their wives sent them to cook. People had a blast. It was a really good time by everybody, and we've actually gained some volunteers from this experience that have come to join us in the kitchen and cook on a regular basis, which has been really nice. However, the pilot, oh yes.
Can I ask about the pilot program? Did you charge?
We did, yes. We charged $10 a class.
I'm sorry?
$10 a class per
But
person.
that didn't pay for, that obviously didn't pay for the extra 3 hours.
It did not, no. I based that price on the materials used in the class, so we weren't taking away from our general food budget and taking away from what we were serving for our lunch program.
Is there room for increasing the fee? Would the seniors pay for an increased fee, or is that?
Well, for the data that I'm going to give you, I've increased that to $12 to see how that goes, to see what it will support in the increases in the interest there. So doing that, like looking at the full spectrum of classes that we wanted to offer over the next year, including intergenerational classes, we wanted to offer some classes to high school students getting ready to go off to college to teach them how to cook, but also give them a serviceable skill if they were looking to get a job while in college, that they could use this knowledge to get a job. So it's for our seniors, but also for the wider community as well. And the numbers that I came up with there would be bringing in $2,112 for the program, so that would offset the cost of his employment and benefits if we raise that.
Also materials.
And also materials, yeah. The Friends Group has also said that they would help pay for that to offset those costs, and we're offering scholarship programs to offset those costs for the seniors. Yeah.
Those revenues are not what was projected. Those are
Right.
numbers.
Those are new numbers that are not in the rest of your data. Yeah. It's just kind of an aside that I was doing to see what would be the detriment to our programs and what that cost would look like. So yeah. Also, with our increased numbers at the center, we've greatly increased our numbers for lunch, especially for our big programs. Once a month we have a big party. Tomorrow's our Mother's Day party. We're expecting 80 people to come to that. So the prep work for that is quite a bit more than for our regular 25, 35 people a day. So those programs, as we increase them, Dominic's skills and expertise are needed for that prep work to make those events go off. So that's what we need those extra 3 hours for. Plus going to the store, his prep time, his planning time, all that is really important to us. As far as my time, it would basically affect the ability for me to increase the programming, to keep programming that we're doing at the rate that we're doing it, at the growth level that we're going at. Also, it would limit the ability and the access to seniors that are still working. We were looking at possibly opening different hours, having maybe 1 day a week that we were open for seniors who want to enjoy programming after they get off of work. So making that available to working seniors as well, we wouldn't be able to do. So, yeah.
And just to remind everybody, they are the only 2 staff members over there. We have a lot of volunteers, which really help with the front desk and registration.
Chopping vegetables.
Yeah, chopping and working in the kitchen
At the front desk.
Chopping vegetables, multitasking is a thing. But we all hands on deck everywhere.
But we do need a staff person to be there when the building is open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so since there's only 2 of us, it's all both of us, and a lot of it me running around and kind of taking care of everything that needs to be taken care of while we're there.
Go ahead. If you could choose one or the other to increase hours, if you couldn't have both.
Kitchen, I would. The cooking program was such a benefit, and
so we have $12,000 balance.
Well, we have actually a little bit more.
I found some extra. Yeah. So, and this week I have called asking for sponsors of various programs as well too. So I'm looking for outside funding to offset our general costs as well.
And I did find a $2,400 mistake in the IT budget where they have a cell phone charge in 2 lines. So that's another $2,400 error that I found.
I have a perfect place to put that.
So I just wanted to remind, and Kristen's already stated it, livability, so goal 3, and it does say to expand senior center programming. And this was already sent to full council back on January 24th, but it's a letter from the Friends of the Senior Center basically endorsing the idea of adding extra hours to Maya's time and then to Chef Dominic. And I can tell you as a liaison, the people on the Friends group are very, very thrilled with the work that both you and Dominic are doing. So kudos to the 2 of you and the team that you've put together. So just wanted to throw that out and remind people of that.
If we can do it in a way that's cost neutral, why wouldn't you do it? Because if you don't do it, you're not going to get any of that money, right?
So I have a question, and I'm coming in kind of one arm behind my back, so I was out ill the night that we did the Metro grants, but I know we talked about some computers at the senior center.
Yeah, and those are kind of one-time expenses, but they are in
We're covering that in this budget?
Yes.
Okay, I just wanted to ensure that we were doing it, because I thought that was a really great.
Over there and, getting some.
Okay.
And the seniors are very excited about that. We're going to have some mouse classes, how to play solitaire.
Absolutely, yeah. It was a great idea.
Got to start slowing somewhere.
Perfect.
Yeah. There's a lot of positions that we're not able to fund in the budget from all departments. But this one, with a small amount of the salary increases, if we can't do both, I definitely think if we can find the money for Dominic. Sorry, Maya. But if we can't do both, if we could do both, that'd be great. But
especially if it's offsetting revenue. Yeah.
Can I suggest that I track what you're saying and you're recommending on a spreadsheet so that we can move forward through the presentations? I will document them, the costs, and then the revenues that we've discussed. I'll confirm with them afterwards to make sure I have the detail on the revenue that they're proposing correct. And then as we come back next week or as we move forward, if there are other ones, I'll add them to the spreadsheet. And then as we regroup and we go into the discussion phase, then we'll have that information. Is that okay?
Great.
Okay.
So are there any other questions on senior center budget? It's on, I know it's a little bit further back. It's on just after page 74, but everything else is pretty status quo and straightforward.
And you'll notice if you have the
asking us to look at the entire, or are we still just on senior center?
This is senior
Just
center.
senior center.
Do you have any
So
other questions
the
for me before I
agenda
run away?
listed differently than, I know, we're hopping around.
All right,
but
gotcha.
So
Follow
the
your
doubling
worksheet.
of the advertising? Do we, what's
What line is that?
The advertising, the printing and advertising.
208.
Joy, yes, to 4,000. So we are putting together rental packets to help increase our rental revenue. So putting together kind of glossy threefolds or so forth. It'll mainly be online based, but to put some handhelds together. Also, we're going to be putting out a survey, satisfaction and interest survey that will be going out. So that's where those increased costs come from.
And Maya's also put together a really nice newsletter that goes out that has program information in it that we've had really for the first time. And
Yeah, I do a monthly newsletter and then a quarterly activity and program guide for people for planning purposes.
Well, thank
This
you
doesn't
very much.
include the free service that I believe Dave Gilmore does online on Facebook. Pushes your menu out almost
That's
every
true.
day.
Yes, he's
So
he's
that's
great.
some
Really
great-
distraught when the menu wasn't.
I know.
His minions do that.
Yes, whoever does that, that's awesome. So,
Katie, will you be including maybe some of the funding support that the Friends are willing to share in your sheet?
I'll look at that. My understanding is that they pay directly for some of the items, and so it never comes through our books. But I'll meet with them and see how we can best present it.
Are they paying for the survey, Maya?
Not as of now.
Okay.
We were going to take that on so that we could really make sure that the programming needs are met.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Mark? Yeah, thank you very much.
Come to the senior center. We've got great food.
And the reason that I put them in different order than your book is that the senior center was the most important in that group, and so I wanted them to go first so that you could hear from them before, in order of priority for Kristen, so that she could present them in that order.
Thank you. So next we have the library budget, and Adrian, our library manager, is here this evening to answer any questions that you might have, and then to also speak to the requests that were made for additional hours and for additional FTEs, and what the impact will be by not funding those positions.
Thank you. Good evening. And I wanted to say I have a bit of a cold I'm getting over, so I hope you can hear me okay. I can't hear myself as well as I usually can. Sorry. So for the library positions, there were 3 changes, 2 of which are just FTE changes, and that didn't make it into the proposed budget. So the first is technical services librarian, and to just explain the name of that, technical in this context means the cataloging and processing of library materials. It's not technical as in IT. And so we have a technical services librarian right now at 32 hours a week. I was asking for it to go to full-time. This position is a position that was created during a reorganization recently, and it previously was a supervisor position. We redistributed some tasks and evaluated the workflow, and now we're to a point where we're saying we would like it to be full-time so that we can keep up with the workflow. So we have 7,000 new items that we add to the library book and audio materials collection every year. Those items all need to be touched and handled by a person to get into the online catalog so that you can search for them and place them on hold. And we have added new items to the collection that are more unique, like Library of Things, and we're adding more world languages materials that take more time to process and to catalog. And then I'm going to move to the youth services librarian position. So that one is what we call a librarian 1 level position. We currently have a 0.5 or 20-hour-a-week librarian. That was added to the library when the Washington County Cooperative Library Services levy was passed about 2 years ago. We moved story time in-house instead of a contracted service. And at 20 hours, that person is doing story times and helping with youth programming and choosing library materials. If that person were able to work 6 more hours a week, she could support our youth services librarian 2, who we've had for years, who is a full-time employee. And that person then would be able to get out to the schools and do more outreach to the schools. Particularly, we want to focus on 3rd graders to get them library cards. I also had an original request that this related to the original council goal of youth engagement with the Youth Advisory Board, that we could support that through our library department and youth services, but I understand that that no longer was a priority. And then the last is a new position, Administrative 2. The library has 23 staff. We have no administrative support directly in the library at all. And we have, for the most part, the well-trained librarians and library management staff are allocating up to a quarter of our time to do administrative work. A lot of that is records management, marketing, social media, editing schedules, purchasing office supplies, etc. If we were to be able to reallocate our professional time instead of doing administrative work to do more professional tasks, we could focus on the council goal of economic development. So in the world of libraries, it's very common for librarians to present business classes and events, resources for startups in the gig economy, and business reference. And then, of course, if that position was not added, we would not have the capacity to do additional business services.
Adrian, is there an opportunity to work with Sherwood High School and potentially their leadership program to involve some of the older high school students to help with some of these youth service programming issues that you're facing?
We do work with teens now. We have teens from the teen leadership classes that volunteer, and we have a teen library advisory board that meets twice a month, and they've been going strong for 4 years. They do help a lot in youth services, and they supplement. I think it ends up being about 20 hours of volunteer work a month to help with program preparations and going through the collection to choose materials that should be withdrawn and that have worn out, things like that. So they do help. The youth services request here is more to free up staff time for things that have to be done by staff, that we wouldn't be able to have volunteers do. It's a higher level librarian work. So librarians have a master's degree in library science, and they have the special training to select materials for the library, to analyze the community, to meet community needs. Some of that has to be made by staff. Once decisions are made, and it's like, here's what our project's going to be, then we can often have volunteers help with more the stuff of it, of moving materials onto carts and bringing them back and pulling stickers off, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay.
In that same vein, is it possible to have a volunteer admin person?
I don't know. I mean, we have not pursued that. We have had an intern in the last year, but it was a librarian intern. So working on programming and collection development and readers advisory, not on records. I think, or social media. If we were to have someone, maybe an intern from, not from library school, but maybe an undergraduate internship. I mean, I haven't reached out to George Fox to ask, but I also don't have time to start that project. Part of the work of having an intern required enough of my time and my staff's time that we can only do that once a year for where we're at right now.
Thank you.
Any other library questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about other portions. The next page is Fieldhouse, where there's really no significant changes, status quo.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Just kidding.
Can you touch on a little bit about revenues going down a little bit? I think there is a a concern that we internally talk about field house revenue declining?
Yeah,
And why is it declining? And
this year especially, we have seen a decline in revenue at the field house. We saw some last year, which we attributed to weather-related incidents. Last January, a year ago, January was very snowy and we had to close quite a bit. This year, however, we lost one of the youth teams. They just did not continue on, so we had a whole league that did not continue on, and we lost that revenue. We also had some changes with the lacrosse program that was regularly renting field space over there. The gentleman who ran For the Love of the Game moved out of state, I believe, to Colorado, still tried to run it from a distance and has really pulled out. And there's still some lacrosse that's happening, but not that actual organization, and that was some stable income for us. It's in the last month or so, things have picked up a little bit, and they've done better than the trend that we were on the first part of the year. So Lance is still hopeful that we can rebound a little bit from it, but we're looking at advertising efforts, reaching out to other groups, updating the website. It's old, trying to train staff and have them work more on social media and other ways to reach people. Most of our income does come from rentals, so it's really making those connections and getting that steady income, not necessarily from the leagues. We've also always been in competition with the field house that is in Tualatin that opened just before us, and there's actually another facility that just opened in Tualatin as well that specializes in agility and training for soccer, and so we've seen that affect our business.
thank you.
I think we have recreation first. So different orders, sorry. Fieldhouse. And then recreation and sports. Again, this is really just the coordination of gyms and fields. No major changes there. It's full-time. We have Lance and Dennis, and Lance also does all the coordination with the schools. So a portion of his time goes to both areas, and then Dennis works in the evenings, afternoons and evenings, to cover the hours that the field house is open. And then we have on-call staff that works as needed to open and close gyms, and then also to help cover the field house.
So, Katie, it seems like a pretty large jump in the salaries, and I can't imagine that's just from the compensation study.
Are you on the rec and sports?
I'm on the rec and sports league. I know we're not supposed to go line item by line item, but when one jumps out.
Right.
Sure.
Because it wasn't that big of a difference on the field house side.
Right.
But
Yeah.
on the rec side, it's 25 grand.
It's the seasonal wages. So if you look in the 1819 adopted, you have the 15,407 that's in the seasonal wages, and the 56,274. We went to a new budgeting system with OpenGov, and it doesn't have the capability to split out those seasonal wages. So there are certain departments where I was able to clearly identify which ones, and for this field house, I didn't split them out. So they're all lumped in together. So that's what it is the seasonals are lumped in there.
Adopted of 56 and 15 to the projected of just 50.
Correct, because they knew that the revenues were going down. So as Joe said, we've been discussing the fact that we had significantly declining revenues. So so they've made changes into how many people they had coming in. So those seasonals that were on there, we haven't been calling them in. So he's been using.
Anticipate having to use them next year.
But we're anticipating
If
that.
there's nothing planned, we do not have staff coming in. Yeah.
Oh, so that's why there's a projected of a positive net, and then a projected loss next year because of using the seasonal.
Because of using the seasonals, and so we don't know. We need to have it in the budget in case we need it. We just
You wouldn't pay seasonals PERS though, would you?
no.
There's quite a bump in PERS. $10,000.
That may be an error in a calculation of mine. I'll look into it.
there.
Well, that would only be from 18,000 to 22,000, right?
Right, but I'll look at the calculation and see. And again, the seasonals, it depends on the classification, whether they're on call, whether there are different categorizations of them, and some of them actually do get PERS depending on how many hours they've worked within a year and depending on whether they've worked for other cities. So it's not just how many hours they've worked with our city, but others. And a lot of people in recreation tend to work for multiple cities, especially referees and things like that. So it's a lot more complicated than...
Once they've hit 600 hours,
Right. And so as opposed to like Public Works, where you just have the seasonal parks and you're generally okay with it in recreation, it's safer to just project that everybody gets it and then you come in under because you just don't know who's going to be there until you report to PERS and they say, oh, you're supposed to be sending it in on this person. So.
Any more questions for Kristen at this point?
And then next is events and volunteers. I don't know if there's any questions there.
Even better than status quo.
Even,
Yeah.
yes, okay. No major changes is what I'll go with. Yes.
That's a better way.
And then Art Center is the last one. And again, no significant changes. And Shanda is here, our Art Center manager, if you have any specific questions.
So I asked this question in the interest of understanding how we're doing in terms of working toward a break even. When the city uses the facility, are we doing a chargeback?
No, not currently. We are tracking that, so we can tell you how many hours of use that is and what the value is, but we have not been charging, for example, if the library comes in there for summer reading, for those types of internal events. Now, if somebody is putting on a fundraiser, for example, the Police Foundation, they do pay just like the Friends for the Arts pays when they come in and put on a fundraiser, because they're making money off of that activity or event and usually doing quite well. So we charge them just as we would the school district.
I understand. Well, or the fire department's paying us to use the facility, right?
They paid as well. They did have a discounted rate because it was off hours and there was an opportunity, the rate was going to be quite large for the rental, $4,000 or something. And even at 50% discount, we felt like it was worth us to take the opportunity to bring in a couple thousand more dollars than have the place sit empty.
Do we charge the surrounding agencies, like if Washington County wants to use it, or we had one of our senators do a event here?
We haven't charged senators or events that Joe has helped facilitate or coordinate, but if Washington County wants to come out and put it on an event and do a rental, yes, they are charged.
And since we're tracking that, we'll get that information together. Because I'm thinking, what city department probably uses the Art Center the most? And I would think it'd be the library, but I'd want to confirm that. Because library does a lot of programming.
At least in the summertime in the library.
I think it's important to know, because if PERS doesn't get resolved and we're looking at doing cuts in year 3 or 4, it'd be nice to know that that center is supporting itself, and which would effectively take it off the table for cuts.
The other thing that we have done, for example, Public Works has used it for trainings for ORPA, Oregon Recreation and Parks Association trainings, and they've negotiated to have a few people enter into the training for free, and so we've tried to help support the other departments by doing that. So they may not be paying rent, but they get 4 registrations.
And we do that at the police community room, so the League of Oregon Cities uses that facility quite often to provide training in the region, and we usually get 1 free attendee for that training, essentially, and we don't charge the league. As Councilor Rosner knows, but maybe others on Budget Committee, We'll be having a work session in early June about our meeting room policies and how we charge at one facility versus another, and there could be changes in that as a result of that discussion. So.
I do have a question about revenue, and really there seems to be a relatively nominal increase annually. Is this what was anticipated over the last few years?
For the Art Center? Shanda, I can't see you, but yes, come on up.
Because by recollection, it seems that it's a bit under what was originally anticipated. So I'm just kind of wondering, I mean, I know it's still relatively new.
If you go back to the original feasibility studies, we're actually doing better than anticipated.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
I mean, there's some people that were hoping that we would break even, which honestly, we never thought that was realistic. Yeah. Art centers, just like Parks and Recreation, do not pay for themselves. They do not break even. So the fact that we have done as well as we have, for example, the Walter Center out in Hillsborough, for a long time they were operating at about 25-30% cost recovery, and they've been around a heck of a lot longer than we have. So I think that we feel like revenue has actually done better than anticipated, and especially once we were able to stabilize the restaurant opening over there. That's Smockville. That's helped because that was always meant to help offset the cost of operations. And rentals have increased, and we've made some changes into the structure of the rentals. But I don't know if there's anything else you want to say to that, just about expectations and growth rates.
Yeah, so, hi. Since I've been here, I've been doing a lot of comparative studies with similar civic spaces and art centers, and we actually are in the top tier, top 10% of spaces like this in both statewide and nationally.
Great.
And it's our goal to keep it that way. Like, it's a beautiful gem of a space, and we want to protect it and keep it vital. Our rentals are up. We are getting more inquiries every day, so we take that pretty seriously.
And again, Councilor Rosner mentioned the fire department or TVFNR using the facility, and it really, they use it at a time that normally the facility is empty. But it was a pretty steep cost for them, and we were potentially going to lose their business to the Chehalem Center in Newburgh. Yeah. And we had a discussion with council, and council fortunately said, look, you know, we expect you to run it as a business, Shanda, and in those situations where you can negotiate a fair price that's reasonable without giving it away, and we can bring activity to the center where otherwise it would be empty, then that's just good business. Yeah. And I think that was good to hear from the council, that and actually in the fee schedule that they will adopt next month, it actually will have some language in there that gives clear direction that the arts center manager, after consulting, if necessary with me, to do that flexibility and run it as a business. Because I believe TVFNR had such a great experience, and guess what? They're going to want to come back. Yeah. And we wouldn't give it away at a reduced rate in the prime time because we want to maximize the use. But if it's sitting empty on a weekday morning and we can get 150 firefighters in here for training who then are going to stay for lunch and maybe go to any of the businesses in Old Town, well, that's a good thing for Old Town.
Absolutely. And I think it's good for the community to know that is happening. So thank you.
And you'll actually see that we've been pretty conservative in our projections, and then our actuals so far have always come in higher than we projected. So I'm hoping that continues to be the trend. We're trying to, hope for the best, but assume that things are going to stay similar, and prepare for both ways. We'd rather blow you away and bring in more revenue than anticipated than fall short.
Well, and thank you. I believe it was about a year ago, right, that you adjusted the reservations as well to maximize the prime time, because we had some kind of quirks about how people were reserving a small window at a prime time and were losing out on some hours.
And many reservations were already in place. So really the effects of those increase in adjustments in rates we're going to see next year, because many people reserve 12, 18 months in advance, and we weren't going to change the rate on them after we had signed a contract. So next year is when we're going to see those increases.
Is the restaurant in 4384 the rental for the restaurant, or is it someplace else?
Yes, it's in
Lockville.
4384.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any questions for Kristen? All right, thank you so much. Thank you to both of you, Shonda. It's nice to meet you.
Thanks for meeting.
So at this point, our agenda calls for our chief and others to present for public safety. However, we have...
We actually have community development first, but go ahead and say the rest of what you were going to say.
Well, but what I was going to say is that we did publish a public hearing this evening that we do need to have. So I'd like to postpone community development as well as public safety and public works until next week and move forward with the state shared revenue public hearing. So I will now open the public hearing on the use of state revenue sharing. Katie.
Got to get my legal verbiage here. The purpose of this hearing is to provide the public with an opportunity to submit testimony concerning the possible uses of state revenue sharing funds for fiscal year 2019-20. The order of business we will follow in conducting this hearing will be receive public testimony, questions from the committee. The hearing will then be closed and no further testimony will be received. Discussion by the committee. Any interested person may present testimony. If you wish to speak, please fill out one of the testimony forms and submit them to Colleen. The committee chair will recognize those persons wishing to speak, and any questions should be addressed through the committee chair. When you come to the microphone, please state your name, city of residence for the record, as this hearing will be recorded. Please speak clearly into the microphone. And please limit your testimony to 4 minutes. And prior to receiving public testimony, I have a very brief presentation to give you an update on what those revenues will be. So first of all, we have the estimates. I wish this was more clear, but that are provided by the League of Oregon Cities. This comes out each year prior to preparing the budget. And there are certain state shared revenues that are distributed based on the population. This population is calculated each year and certified by some department in Portland State University. And ours, the number we're going off of is 19,505.
Almost one.
Yep, almost 20,000. So for liquor revenues, you can see that we've gone up just a little bit. Cigarette taxes are going down just a little bit. 911 taxes are still going up. The Highway Trust Fund revenues, those go into the street funds, have gone up quite significantly. And then marijuana tax revenues we do not receive at this time because there are no allowed private recreational, that's the word. I'm like, what is the word? We have medicinal but not recreational marijuana facilities in the city, so we do not get that distribution that we would otherwise get. So 58,000 is the per capita, and then there's another distribution that would be received by the actual tax that would be received. So in the general fund, the intergovernmental piece is 2.2 million approximately out of the total revenues of 13.8 million. And then as we narrow down into that intergovernmental piece, the pieces that are in yellow are the pieces we're talking about during this hearing. And the purpose for this hearing is that we get these as an allotment from the state, and the goal is to make sure that citizens have the right to discuss how those revenues are being used. So our liquor tax is about 17% of our general fund revenues. State revenue sharing, that's a general bulk pot of money, about 12%, and then the cigarette tax is only 1%. Street operations, which we'll talk about tomorrow, next week. I know we're just staying here all night. Next week is in street operations, and that's $1.5 million, or 70% of the street operations budget. The way the city currently uses the state shared revenue funds is that they are commingled in the general fund along with other non-restricted funds. They're not specifically designated. In other words, we don't put a specific revenue source and designate those funds for specific items. But they are used to support public safety, our administration, community services, facilities, and some community development. They're not used for the building department itself. That is supported solely by building, so the planning portion of community development. In street operations, it is used only for expenses related to streets, and sidewalks also qualify for the use of them. But paving, street trees, slurry seal, most of it's used for crack sealing in our streets and personnel. So with that, do we have any public comment? Colleen, have you received any papers? No? Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address us on the public hearing?
Don't all jump up at once. Given there are no comments, I will now close the public hearing on the use of state revenue sharing. I will now adjourn the meeting. We will recess until Thursday, May 16th at 6 o'clock. And I thank everyone for their time. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.